You are listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast exploring Scripture and all things related to it. New episodes are released daily. For more information, check out glossahouse.com and subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube. Welcome and enjoy.
Hello, welcome to Proof Text. I am Michael Halcomb, and today I have the privilege of speaking with one of my former Bible professors, Dr. David Fiensy, and I'm really excited about this one. I want to share with you, as we get started, his website, so you know where to go. It's davidafiensy.com, and I was poking around on there before we started recording, and a lot of good stuff on here. You can see his blog, his books, some media, speaking engagements, and all sorts of things. We're going to talk about some of those books today and some forthcoming stuff as well. But good stuff on here. Yeah, so Dr. Fiensy, good to see you again.
I should see you, Michael. I saw you last November in San Antonio.
Yeah. We tend to run into each other every so often at those Society of Biblical Literature conferences, and always enjoy that. So you were one of my professors when I was doing my undergrad work at Kentucky Christian University. Are you still teaching at KCU? Or you retired and done? Or are you teaching in there?
Well, I am retired, but I am teaching one class a semester. Enjoy. I still enjoy interacting with the students. They're a little smaller than you were probably used to, the Bible classes, but they're nearly everybody in there is engaged in the topic, interested and enthusiastic. So it's good.
So the year after I graduated, which would have been 2003. Boy, it's hard to believe it was over 20, almost 25 years ago, 21 years ago. I remember that following year, they stopped requiring incoming students to do the minor in Bible, but I just got the news or the magazine that they sent out, and it seems like they're bringing that back now. Yeah.
There is a movement to do it. I don't know if it's official, but there is a movement to do that.
Yeah.
So that's good and it's bad. If people are forced to be in there, they grumble and complain. And but if they are in there by choice in those classes, I mean, these are kids that really want to know. They really are into the issues and the methods of biblical study, and so they're a joy to teach. So it's a trade-off.
Well,
I guess it's a good thing.
Yeah. I was excited to see that in the magazine that they send out with called The Night or something like that.
The Voice.
The Voice, that's it. The Voice. Yeah. So I think the president was talking about it on the inside page of the book or something like that, his little blurb. But yeah, so I remember taking courses with you. I took your what's it, intro? I don't remember if it was Intro to Jesus or Intro to the Historical Jesus, but I remember using your little blue book, that had to do with the life of Christ. And when we moved out here to Hawaii, I had before that a library of about 3,000 books, and I could only pare it down to 200 to bring to Hawaii. So I had to get rid of, I gave a bunch of books to my seminary colleagues, and so mainly the language books I kept. So I've been trying to get a hold of that little blue one again, and we were talking about that back in November. But so you're working on, you got some other books in the works. We were just talking about that briefly before we came on. So let's start there. Tell us who you are and what you've been doing at like Kentucky Christian, and then I want to jump into some of your work.
Okay. So I mean, I've been teaching biblical studies since 1980, so 40 some years, in various places, various venues. I taught at Kentucky Christian for 7 years, and we went to Europe for a couple of years. I took a pastoral ministry back in the United States and returned to Kentucky Christian in 1995 and retired from there in 2017. So I'm professor emeritus there, but I am teaching one class a semester and having more time to write. I did some writing while teaching, but got a lot of time to write now. And writing in several genres. I published 2 works of fiction, 2 novels.
All right, nice.
And a couple of works I guess I thought of them as useful in the local church. Studies, one study on the parables, another study on Galatians, Philippians together, because those 2 have a lot of autobiographical references. So it's really a study of the spirituality of Paul in those 2 letters. So those about, and then I published in 2021 the Archaeology of Daily Life, I call it.
Yeah.
Just trying to use as much archaeology as I could, along with the texts, to sketch out what people commonly call daily life, the life of ordinary persons in the late Second Temple period, the period of Jesus and the early church. And now I have a new one that's in the process. It's in the pipeline. I haven't seen a precise publication release date, but I'm guessing next fall, early fall.
Okay, excellent. Are you able to talk about that? And you showed me you showed me the cover, but we'll get into that. So I've read numerous of these books. I've read the Message and Ministry of Jesus book, obviously. I have the Archaeology, the Galilee books as well.
Jesus the Galilean.
Well, I had that one. That was the one from the Sound of Mark, right? I do have that still, actually. But
yeah, okay.
The Galilee, the late.
The 2 that I co-edited.
Yes. So I have that. I have the Archaeology of Daily Life book, and also the Christian Origins and Ancient Economy book. So I have been keeping up with your writings since I left Kentucky Christian.
Oh, thank you.
Maybe you'll be happy to hear.
Yes, I am happy.
So
the 2 on the one on the far right, the one on the far left are the 2 works of fiction. The far right is a historical fiction. It's intended to teach daily life by setting a fictional family into the actual history of the Jewish War of 66 to 73. So this family goes through the war, but in the process, we learn about what life is like for the entire family. But there's a theme in it as well. I mean, there's a point to the book in addition to that. On the far left, it's a modern, set in modern times. It's a story of mystery, but it's really a theological work. Everything I write has theology in it. So
right. So
those are the works of fiction.
So as far as like the other scholarly books, like the Christian Origins and Archaeology of Daily Life, and then you have the Insights from Archaeology. So, as I read these books, it seems like, and help me like crystallize this or sharpen my description of this as you desire, but it seems like part of what you're doing is you tend to like dig into the archaeological findings and then sort of from there use that to reconstruct what different scenarios might have been like for different persons in antiquity, and then you sort of move from there or stay in that same sort of pocket to talk about what life would have been like daily for like a Christian in the ancient world, and then also like for Jesus and his close followers and that sort of thing. And then you sort of This allows you to create a bigger picture of what the wider, ancient world would have looked like within this time period of the New Testament and surrounding the New Testament. And then, how that sort of sheds light on the scriptural passages. And then from there to theology. That's sort of like, as I'm reading your works, that feels like the sort of movements. Am I wrong? Am I on the right track? Or
I think it's more or less correct. I would say in my research and writing and teaching, I've gone through 3 phases of investigating the Bible. So I went to Duke University for the PhD, and the emphasis down there, at least at that time, was very much Judaism, Jewish texts as the window into the New Testament. And that's why I went there. I went there to study primarily under W.D. Davies, who was, I consider, the premier proponent of that method and perspective. But there were many other people once I got down there that were fantastic to work with. So I had a great time. So I tried to immerse myself in the Jewish texts and then bring that into my study of the New Testament. I found it really enriched and helped me comprehend what's going on in the New Testament. Well, then I get out of there, and I'm still doing that, still doing it today. But the 1980s witnessed a kind of trend, especially in American New Testament scholarship, because we had come through my youth, 60s and 70s, the civil rights movement, the feminist movement, the anti-Vietnam War movements, right? A lot of social protest. And that spilled over into New Testament studies. And people began asking, well, what about social movements? Did they have anything to do? And so you had some landmark works like Horsley and Hanson's Bandits, Prophets, and Messiahs, something like that. But and so that was just revolutionary. Then you had people like Bruce Molina, who was writing on the New Testament and anthropology.
The context group. Yeah.
And so I began to read into that quite a bit. So that's behind the book Christian Origins and the Ancient Economy. Yeah. It's really a collection of several essays that I publish here and there. And I found it very helpful, but nothing quite does it. A lot of these movements are helpful, but they don't quite scratch the itch completely. Yeah. So then in the late 80s, early 90s, began hearing about the excavations in Galilee. They began to do excavations in Jewish villages, synagogues, and so forth. And so now you have to think about, well, here's one other resource to help with our study. So I began participating in excavations and then eventually began writing on the use of art. I just consider archaeology another resource.
Right.
The way I read the pseudepigraph and the Dead Sea Scrolls as a resource. There's just one more item out there that helps me comprehend what was going on. Because the key to understanding the New Testament is figure out what's happening, what's going on when these things are taking place. So I've gone through 3 phases. The archaeology phase is just the 3rd phase. These aren't mutually exclusive; they're right. Add-on, and no one method or phase has answered all the questions. But together, I'm starting to get a somewhat of a clear idea what the New Testament's about.
That's funny. So you mentioned Bruce Molina and the context group. In my own story, after I left Kentucky Christian and was working on my MDiv, I remember sitting down in the bookstore in the basement of Lexington Theological Seminary, and they had the that whole New Testament commentary series from Molina and Pilch and those guys, and that was really like my first exposure to. But I remember picking up, I think it was the book on the Gospel of John, the commentary they had written or something like that, and I sat down there almost a whole day in the bookstore on the floor and just read that book. I was enamored by that, and so I started to, at these SBL meetings, go to their little get-togethers and things like that. And one of the interesting things, though, that I've noticed in your work is quite a bit of pushback to some of the ideas that the context group has sort of rigorously put out there. And one of the, I don't really deal with the context group anymore, but this is kind of fascinating to me, because you could almost do a whole social scientific study on the context group itself.
Exactly.
And the sort of patronage system that they have, with Lena and Pilch at the top, and you don't question them, and that whole like kinship network, and that's pretty interesting to me. And I remember sitting in one of those SBL meetings where Zeba Crook, I think that's his name, he delivered a paper, and he said something like undoing the house that Molina and Pilch built or something, and that set off like a firestorm, because it was disrupting the patronage system, right? And so, but I've noticed that in your books that you've pushed back, and I think quite well, against some of the stuff that at least for a little while was taking center stage in New Testament studies.
Well, yeah, I went to several of their meetings. They used to meet in Oregon. I went to 3, I think, and they often spoke in sense of in group and out group.
Yes,
so you're right. You could do a sociological study on just them.
Yeah.
I don't know if they were self-aware of that. I thought they were nice people.
Yeah.
I liked them all. And for me, it was an intellectual and a kind of religious experience, because at the contact group, I mean, it's wide open. They could say the wildest stuff. I mean, just the wildest. But then on the last hour of the weekend, they'd meet together for a common worship service and share the Eucharist. It was just an amazing kind of group. So I don't dislike anybody. If I criticize them, it's not because I dislike them. I didn't make enemies I'm aware of. Matter of fact, one guy I came to regard him as a fairly good friend, and I've asked him a couple of times to participate in writing, editing projects where I had collections, articles, and chapters collected. But yeah, here's the problem. They get really immersed in sociological theory, but don't have any data to back it up. And here's an example. They decide that the farmers, the villagers, are half starved in Galilee.
Right.
And I ask, well, what's the evidence? You're a logical positivist. Well, I mean, I have a right to ask for evidence, right?
Right.
Just tell me how you know. Well, it's in the sociological model. That's not evidence.
Right.
The model is not evidence. If you can find, I asked for skeletal remains. You can tell in the remains if a person's died of starvation, or if they maybe didn't die of starvation, but they were underfed and they died of some other disease, pneumonia or something. But it shows up, but nobody cites any actual evidence of that. So these are the things I began to notice. So as I say, I enjoyed enormously the association and reading those things, and I still do look at them.
Yeah.
But I just, I'm a kind of person who wants evidence. That's part of the training of a good PhD. Give us the data. Give us the. I thought they were long on theory and short on data. They're lovely people, all of them.
Yeah.
But they were long. I mean, that's why I say you could hear some of the just wildest presentations at context, and you're thinking, what on earth would make you suggest that? But then on the last day, the last hour, you meet together and hug each other and sing hymns and share the Eucharist. And, okay, if that's if that does it for you, I'm good with it.
So your model, I can't remember if it's the Ancient Economy book or the Archaeology of Daily Life book, but it might be actually in both of them that you touch on this. But you sort of you make the case that Jesus wasn't some sort of poor straggler, itinerant preacher, and you sort of have this. I can see the chart in my head, but sort of like a web of connections there. It's pretty intricate, but that is a pretty common. I think it's a pretty commonly accepted view, not just among like people in scholarship, but probably among a lot of lay people too. I would think that Jesus was this poor, like you're saying, half-starved agrarian based worker, going around all the time like hungry. And so you offer quite a different sort of picture from the data. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see evidence that he was among the destitute. So in Archaeology of Daily Life, and more explicitly in this new book that's coming, I think of Galilean society as having three tiers: the elites, the very bottom, the totally destitute people who are beggars. They're beggars because they are physically infirm, or they've lost a limb, or they're dying, but they're blind maybe. But in the middle, we have the laboring class. Jesus was in the laboring. If we take seriously that he's called a tectone, I don't see why not.
Yeah,
there's no reason to doubt that. And so I asked, within the laboring class, I divided into three tiers. Upper tier might be the superintendents and the intellectual people. The very bottom tier, they just have their labor. They can work. They're not infirm, but they just do backbreaking work. In between are the skilled. They're manual laborers, but skilled. Well, that's what Jesus would be. And we have examples of people who are skilled manual laborers. They found several of them in this tomb collection, Givat HaMiftar. The four tombs that are in the Givat HaMiftar area of northern Jerusalem. One guy even tells you he's a worker, the Simon, the builder of the temple, Simon the worker, and we assume he was a construction worker. Maybe he was a skilled carpenter or a skilled mason. But he's a healthy guy. He's got an ossuary with his name on it and his occupation. Another one is Jonathan the potter in the same tomb. To form a tomb in that location and ossuaries, you're not destitute. Well, that's got to be that's the group, that's the level Jesus came from. So there's no evidence he was destitute, but there's comparative evidence that he was comfortable. That he had to work manually, but he was comfortable. So if you just take the evidence, I don't see. Some people have a kind of romanticized view that he has to be totally poor, totally destitute.
Right.
And then I guess the sociological movement, they wanted to say everybody was half starving in Galilee, so Jesus was really leading a socioeconomic protest, and that's what his movement was all about. Well, again, I don't see the evidence for it. I respect them. I respect their view. I've considered it. It's fun to hear it, but I don't see it. I don't see enough evidence for that.
It's fun to hear it. And maybe correct me if I'm wrong about this too, but was one of the points you were making, since he was in so you have the 3 tiers and then the 3 tiers within the middle tier, right? And he's that sort of skilled labor. This is part of what perhaps allowed him to move so fluidly down sort of the social ladder, but also up the social ladder to get, patrons and people who help finance the ministry and this sort of thing. But is that correct? Am I saying that correctly?
That's the hypothesis. I'm not sure that I invented that hypothesis. I think so. You have the Shirley Jackson case that came up with the idea of Jesus working in Sepphoris. This is
Right.
the 1920s. And you have Richard Beatty, who worked at the Sepphoris excavations. I worked at Sepphoris one summer. Great fun. I think he worked at Sepphoris, Richard Beatty, several seasons, and he produced several articles and then a monograph. I think it's his hypothesis that Jesus working in an urban environment enabled him to move freely in all levels of society. Yeah, I mean that makes sense. It as Shirley Jackson Kay said, 3 miles away, and he never went there. And you got all that work, you have all that occupation opportunity, and they never walked over there. There are New Testament scholars that say he wouldn't have ever known about it. 3 miles is a long way. Some people come to Nazareth. These are notable scholars. Some of them taught at my alma mater.
Yeah.
And they come to Nazareth and they say, and they try to walk to say, well, these are like 80-year-old people. We can't get there. It's true. I guarantee you, a 30-year-old man back in those days can walk 3 miles and not even sweat.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. They didn't know that there were all these opportunities to apply these skills, these construction skills. And they never went over there. It's not imaginable. So I think Case, I think Case has a good point. And Richard Beatty has tried to expand it. And I cited them in my materials, but what I tried to do is find evidence of comparative families, like the family of Simon the temple builder, Jonathan the potter, who live in Jerusalem. They can afford a tomb in a rather high-priced area and an ossuary, and they have somebody to engrave their name and their occupation on it. So the level of skilled craft person is not a destitute level. It's
Right.
They weren't rich, but they'd be like a factory worker making, I don't know how much they make today, but making enough to make a house payment and buy a car. They'd be like that. So the whole destitute, half-starving hypothesis, I think, collapses.
Yeah.
Lack of evidence.
So what light does this then shed on, like, our understanding of Jesus, that beyond, like, okay, he was comfortable, he was moving sort of within the middle of the middle, he was a skilled laborer. What else does this shine light on? Other sort of aspects of his life or his movement? If he wasn't leading this sort of social rebellion, right, to overthrow the empire or the government, then we would have to include, okay, his movement must have been about something else. So does the archaeology and the daily life help us shift to be able to make more substantive claims about things like that? Or
why do you have an itinerant ministry? I don't know that archaeology. That's a good question. Does the archaeology help us understand? I don't know why that would make you leave your home and wander as a preacher. Archaeology, I don't think, is going to explain that. What made Amos leave Tekoa in Judea and go up to the northern kingdom of Israel? Archaeology can't offer the answer. I think he had a sense of calling. I think the sense of calling happened to him at his baptism. And there's nothing about archaeology that can. Archaeology can help us understand the people to whom he spoke and who taught, but it can't explain calling.
Yeah,
And that's how I would see his. That's why I would think he was wandering and teaching.
what are some of, as you've been working in, you mentioned the 3 phases earlier. I think this would be interesting to maybe hear. You gone through the sort of Jewish historical phase, or the Jewish texts, Jewish practices, and then you went sort of into that sociological, social scientific stage, and then the archaeology stage. What's a takeaway, a major takeaway or two from like each of those sort of phases of your own study that have given a lot of shape to your own understanding of Jesus and the Jesus movement, or even just your own study?
I mean, from the study of Jewish texts, the Mishnah, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Pseudepigrapha, my conclusion is you can't understand Jesus if you don't immerse yourself in Judaism. You just can't. That's the key. So these people that were in the 70s and 80s that were claiming Galilee was semi-pagan, thoroughly Hellenized. Jesus was like a cynic philosopher. That was really a wrong-headed movement. That really is that's leading you down the wrong path. So I'm more. I don't want to demonize any person, but I'm more an E.P. Sanders type of guy who's sort of the successor to W.D. Davies at Duke. I'm a W. Davies, E.P. Sanders type person with respect to study of Jesus than I am the people that were constructing in their minds a cynic philosopher Jesus that just doesn't fit the literature. So that's what I take, and I still take that. If I have a question about what's going on in a text, in Gospels text, in a saying of Jesus, I'm going to find the answer by study of Jewish sources, not by reading Plato or Socrates or any of the Cynic philosophers. As far as the social science phase, it does make a difference. It is helpful, even though I can be critical of them for want of evidence. They do raise things. They do alert us. Of course, most of their studies have come from a kind of Marxist base, and Marxism sees a perpetual conflict. Matter of fact, the offshoot of Marxism was called class conflict. The classes are always in conflict. Well, that's not totally off the wall. So it makes you a little bit hip. So when you read somebody like Josephus, who was an elite, and Josephus talks about the Jewish rebels, he calls them scum. He has horrible names for them. Scum of the earth and a bunch of names you shouldn't repeat. You think, well, were they, or were these just people that had enough and they couldn't take it anymore? So it alerts you to the fact that there are class conflicts in society. They're not always at the same level. They rise and they fall depending on the economy, depending on what the occupying force may be doing at the time. But there are class conflicts. To deny that is naive and myopic, I think. So it makes you a little bit a little bit suspicious of the sources you read, especially when they're elite sources describing things. You can't believe everything you read in Josephus or anybody, any elite author. As far as the archaeological phase, what I'm looking for, and what I think a lot of people look for, is just the everyday person who you're not going to read about in Josephus. He only talks about the outstanding people. They're outstandingly bad or outstandingly friendly to him. But just ordinary, Joseph and Mary type people. What they do every day, how they think about things, what kind of life did they live, and you can see it in their final resting place, the tomb they're in. If they're in an ossuary, and do they have anything inscribed on it, on the ossuary? What do their skeletal remains look like? Were they healthy? Were they sick? If you have a chronic disease like malaria, it shows up in the bones. If you were underfed, or if you died from somebody smashing your skull in, it's there. So in the archaeological phase, I'm just looking for the average person, the average man and woman. What was life like for them? So that's who's listening to Jesus, not the Josephus types, but the average people.
When did you grow up in a Christian family? Like, were you raised in a Christian household?
I do.
Do you remember a distinct time, sort of like when Christ got a hold of you and the Lord got a hold of you, or for a lot of people, they can't remember a distinct time, but do you remember a distinct time? Was there a...
Yeah, I tell people, matter of fact, last Sunday I preached a sermon which kind of touched on this. A lot of people talk about the Jesus miracle where he did the second touch. I think it's a guy near Bethsaida. He touches his eyes and he says, "I see people like trees walking." And Jesus touched him again. So they make a lot about the second touch. Some call it sanctification. But I tell people, I think we're converted. If you are converted, I think you're converted more than once. I think different situations call sometimes for another. So, I mean, I became a Christian. In the Christian church, it's probably like the Baptist church. As soon as you're old enough to know what you're doing, they will baptize you and you're a Christian. But then I was in high school preparing to go up and study law. My senior year in high school, I was going to be a lawyer, so major in pre-law. Didn't go to law school somewhere. I didn't know where, but sort of like Martin Luther. But unlike Luther, lightning didn't strike my horse or anything like that. But it just, I just began having, it's very hard to describe, just began having reflections. Do I really want to do this? Do I want to live a life that's, primarily I wanted to be a lawyer, to be famous, have money and have power, maybe run for politics. But is that really what you want to do with your life? It's hard to explain a call. I consider that my call to ministry. I was reading this book by Thomas Merton. You know who he is?
Yeah.
So The Seven-Story Mountain, his biography.
Great book.
He describes his conversion to Catholicism. That we can, but then he tries to describe for us why he went into the priesthood. And it's just garbled. You can't explain it. You think that, wait a minute, somehow I missed the point, where I missed the part where he saw a light or something. But it's call to ministry is not an easy thing to articulate and communicate to somebody else. You can know you're wrestling with it, but you can't explain it to somebody else. So anyway, it was my senior year in high school, and I changed everything. My parents were devastated.
Wow.
Totally devastated by my change of vocation, just as Martin Luther's father was.
Yeah.
Part of the story was completely upset over it.
So you had this this change right before high school. So it's interesting to me, like, I'm curious to hear, because when the Lord gets a hold of us, we kind of begin with some image and understanding of Jesus in mind at that point. But over time, that of course, grows and develops, or at least it should, sharpens, crystallizes. And so I'm curious too about what that's, what can you articulate? This may be hard, but can you articulate how the person of Jesus has changed for you over time, like in your mind? Like,
I'm not sure I can. I think when I was 9 years old and I was baptized, I thought of Jesus more as the risen Lord than the historical Jesus. Right? The risen Lord who died for my sins and so forth. But that kind of thinking of the historical Jesus and his teachings in the Gospels kind of was behind my sense of calling. I don't know why, but I'd never read or even discovered the Sermon on the Mount. I was a senior in high school, went to church, but I don't think anybody preached on the Sermon on the Mount. It's not something evangelical churches then, maybe even today, think a lot of.
right.
And I remember speaking to the pastor about some of those sayings, and he seemed shocked that they were in the Bible as well. I remember him saying, it was, turn the other cheek. I remember him saying, well, I'm not doing that. This was a guy who carried a pistol in his car when he went out to make pastoral visits. I'm not turning the other. I'm just asking, well, how do we apply that? How do we live it? But the teachings of Jesus just began to have a profound effect. I mean, this is not just a hypothetical guy who died for me, but this is a real person with real teachings. Do I take them seriously or do I just ignore them? And that was part of the call, encountering the historical Jesus through his words, through his teachings. And that's kind of a debate that's going on today among evangelicals. Some evangelicals say the teachings of Jesus are incidental. They aren't anything we need to concern ourselves about. He just came to die for us, that's all. It's what happens from Pentecost on. But other evangelicals say, well, why do we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John?
Yeah,
they're
right.
incidental. Obviously, the early church didn't think that way.
Yeah.
So that really has driven my desire to understand Jesus, his teachings, and the people he taught. That's fine. I guess you could say it started then, but I didn't think of it that way. I'm going to go out and major in Jesus. But that's been driving my quest, my own personal quest, you might say.
Yeah.
Since high school.
So that the quest, I'm sure it's deepened your not merely your understanding of Jesus, but the relational aspect, the devotional aspect, your faith in general. How has the study of Jesus given shape to your faith, your devotion, your relationship, all that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think his teachings are astonishing and powerful. I tell people, if they ask me, why are you a Christian? I say, well, number one, the figure of Jesus. Absolutely a powerful figure. His teachings are amazing. So countercultural for his day and even our day. If you have evangelical churches that can't stomach his teachings, he's countercultural, right? I mean, a lot of these celebrity pastors can't tolerate his teachings. So they couldn't in his own day. So the figure of Jesus. And secondly, of course, the what we would call the meta-narrative today in the postmodern era. The meta-narrative of Christianity, I think, is a compelling narrative.
Yeah.
Thirdly, I find the Christian faith intellectually satisfying. It checks all the boxes for me. And then, of course, it'd be personal religious experience. But those 4 reasons I give. And if a person has been through all that, they get it. If they haven't, they scratch their head and say, I don't get any of that. But that's I began with the figure of Jesus as the reason for my commitment to Christianity. I mean, to be a Christian means to be a disciple of Jesus.
Yeah.
If you don't see that, I don't think you see what you ought to see as a Christian. And throughout church history, there is this this tendency to deny a part of that. The Gnostics couldn't accept that he actually died on the cross. That wouldn't
Right.
fly for them. The Nazis in 1930 take the cross out and put in the swastika in the church, take out the Bible, stop preaching crucifixion, stop talking about the Sermon on the Mount. That's sissy stuff. Let's talk about victory and manliness. And so throughout history, the inside enemy of the Christian faith, the enemy within, has sought to change that, change the picture of Jesus we get from the four Gospels and from Paul. I mean, I think Paul echoes and cites many of the teachings of Jesus. I don't agree with people who say he had no interest. That's hogwash. Okay? Well, that's too harsh. I disagree with that, but let's put it that way.
Hogwash is a good term. I like it.
It's a little strong. It's kind of insulting for people that hold that view, so I'll take it back.
Are you more or less hopeful? I'm asking this on the heels of what you just said, because you're making the point that in pretty much every generation, they're uncomfortable with some aspect of Jesus or his teaching, and they're trying to sort of do away with it. And Albert Schweitzer, as we all know, was we all sort of create the historical Jesus in our own image and likeness, right? But as I look at like our culture today, especially in Western culture, where human sexuality is such a big deal, it seems like the sexual ethic of Jesus is certainly one thing that's attempting to be done away with, or at least drastically modified. That's affecting the church, and so I'm curious. You're a Bible professor, you're just part-time these days, but have been for decades, and I'm wondering, are you more or less hopeful about the future of the church, like in the United States, these days?
The future of the church, yeah. In the United States, I don't know. I mean, I hear that the global South, the church in the global South, is exploding. South America, Africa, and Southeast Asia, not Southwest Asia, but Southeast Asia, is exploding, and that it's the center of Christianity is shifting toward the global South, away from Northern Europe and North America. So I don't know if North America is going to become like Europe, and have a lot of people who might say they're culturally Christians, but not really Christians.
Right.
I guess Richard Dawkins, the famous atheist, is now claiming that he's a cultural Christian. For years, he railed against any kind of religion or Christianity. Now he's saying he's a cultural Christian, but he doesn't believe in you. So he kind of typifies what is true for many people. Although we lived in Europe for a couple of years, and I ran into many fine Christian people, really, really fine. But it's like the students I have now, they're only in the class because they want to. So these Christian people, you may go to church because they want to. It's not an obligation. It's not anything to curry favor with anybody. So there are still some fine Christian people in Northern Europe, and I think that will continue. That will be true with North America. I just don't think the North American church is going to be the dominant one in the world. I don't know if it's going to be South America or Africa, but it's going to be, or maybe both together. It's going to be in the global South that the church is the strongest. And more power to them. Great.
Right.
The power of the Holy Spirit. I'm all for it. It doesn't have to be a white Christian. I mean, it shouldn't be a white church. It should be multi-ethnic, multi-racial, multicultural. So I'm very optimistic about the church. I don't know. In the United States, it's a problem what has happened in evangelical circles in the last 10 years, maybe longer than that. The acceptance of abuse in churches because these guys raise money. The guy's an abuser, but he raises money. Overlook it. That's absolutely it just can't happen. It just absolutely cannot happen. Nothing so kills the faith in young people as something like that. They've done I saw a recent study. They did a rather large survey asking different age groups, are you hopeful for the future of the church in the United States? And those least hopeful were Generation Z, the people in college now. Least hopeful. They just, because they look at the hypocrisy and they, you run in, even where I'm teaching at KCU, students who are deconstructing.
Yeah.
And deconstructing can be healthy, but it can also be devastating too if you do it in the wrong way. So I don't know where it's going, but so occasionally a celebrity preacher with status will speak out with courage, but mostly they don't, because they know if they said what was right, half their, or maybe more. So I just read this book by Tim Alberta, The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory. And he just goes from one case study after another. And he cites some who were they were preaching the gospel at a church of 200. Then they got into other stuff, right? Other stuff. Now they have a church of 2,000. Then he goes the other way. A guy who's preaching in a church of 1,500. And he began to read the Sermon on the Mount and said, I want to preach that. He went from 1,500 down to 100.
Wow.
So you have some with courage, and you have some who say, I'm going to tell people what they want to hear.
Right.
And so I don't know who's going to win that conflict in the long run. I don't know if Gen Z is prescient, if they can see handwriting on the wall, or if they're just overly pessimistic. But as far as the church, I'm optimistic about the church in general and the great things that are happening in the global South. I'm going to participate in that. As a matter of fact, in a couple of months, I'm going to teach in Cuba. With people studying to be pastors, men and women from all different denominations. They're all Protestants, but they're all different kinds of Protestants down there. Even if you're a Protestant, I taught down there a few years ago, even if you're no matter what your Protestant faith, the worship service is rocking. It's absolutely raises the roof. So they're great people. They're fantastic brothers and sisters. So it's an honor to be able to contribute ministerial preparation.
Before we go, we'll start wrapping up here, but you mentioned that you had a new book coming out. Can you show us the
here's the cover.
Yeah, the cover. Tell us a little bit about this and where people can get it.
So it's published by Cascade Publishing. I estimate it would be out in the fall, but probably the early fall. They want to bring it out for the SBL in San Diego. So it's the title is called The Realia Jesus. Realia are objects that you excavate from the soil. So it's an attempt to explain the Gospel of Luke by referring to various kinds of archaeological artifacts. Artifacts all the way from entire villages and palaces down to microscopic things in the soil, and many, many things in between. A lot of skeletal remains. I refer to human bones a lot because the professionals read the bones. They can tell you a lot of things about a person. That's how I meet the actual people. So a lot of issues that they're hashing out. Where was the house of Peter? In Capernaum or Bethsaida? Where was Golgotha? Where was Jesus crucified? The traditional spot in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, or on so-called Gordon's Calvary? I don't think so. Or somewhere near the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. That's what I opt for. Do we know where Jesus' tomb was? I think so. Where was the village of Bethsaida? There's competing stories about that now. So it handles the controversy, but it mostly tries to explain what's happening based on the objects that are retrieved from the soil, all the way from palaces and villages down to microscopic things. They all tell a story, and they all help us understand the story in the gospel. I chose Luke because it's the most comprehensive biographically. Start with John the Baptist, and you end like the others. You end with the Ascension, but in between there's a lot more detail about the life of Jesus. So that's why I took the gospel. But I mean, you have to refer to Matthew and Mark and John, where there are parallels, and I do that.
Excellent. Well, I'll look forward to getting that one and promote it here on the podcast when it comes out. So one of the things I ask people to do is to give a parting shot, and it's just a quote, a saying, favorite Bible verse or song lyric. Doesn't have to be what connected to what we've been talking about, but it can be. So yeah, I was gonna ask, do you have a parting shot you can share with us?
I'll read you a quote that I have in there. I'm quoting a young lady named Felicity Harley. She says, "We can no longer study religion as an exclusively textual phenomenon. We must be able to use images and objects." And that's what I tried to do in the new book, The Reality of Jesus, an archaeological commentary on the Gospel of Luke. I do use a lot of text, of course, but I try to supplement that with as much archaeology as I can. So it's an archaeological commentary on Luke.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Fiensy, it's great seeing you. Appreciate just carving out some time to sit and talk with me. I'm sure our viewers and listeners will be excited to hear this too. And I appreciate your ministry, and keep up the good work in Cuba and in Grayson and everywhere else. So blessings to you.
Thank you. And to you. I'm proud of you, Michael.
For everybody out there watching, check out davidafiensy.com. You can keep up with the books on the blog there, and check out glossahouse.com and the Glossa House TV YouTube channel, the Proof Text podcast, all that good stuff. We're going to stop there, my friends, and say we hope that helps.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.